Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. If you're new here, what we do on this channel is talk about people who have had tragic or unfortunate ends to their life. Anyway, let's get into today's video. Donald Mackay was an Australian businessman in the town of Griffith in New South Wales in the 1960s and 1970s, when he decided to begin a political career and a stance as an anti-drug campaigner. But on the 15th of July 1977, he disappeared and he was never seen again. Here, we will investigate what might have happened to him. Donald Bruce Mackay was born on the 13th of September 1933 at Griffith in New South Wales, a major town in the Murrumbidgee area. He was the third and youngest child of Lennox William Mackay and Phyllis Roberts. Lennox worked as a house decorator and furniture salesman, and his work eventually drew the family to move to Sydney in 1943, when Donald was 10 years of age. There he attended Barker College, a boarding school in the suburbs of Sydney, before following in his father's footsteps and working for several furniture sales companies. He then studied as an accountant and completed his national service. In the 1950s, under the terms of the National Service Act of 1951, all Australian males were required to undertake 176 days of military training, and then to serve part-time for 2 years in the Australian National Reserve. Having completed this, Mackay then returned to his original hometown of Griffith in the mid-1950s to work with his older brother in the family business. On the 6th of April 1957, Donald married Barbara Vincent Dearman, a physiotherapist, who was 2 years his junior at St Martin's Anglican Church in Killera, a suburb on the upper north shore of Sydney. Barbara was an active member of the Uniting Church in Griffith, a large multi-denominational church in Australia, consisting of a union of Methodist and Presbyterian churches. Donald was drawn into the Uniting Churches as a result of his marriage, and became a highly active Christian in subsequent years. The Uniting Church in the 1960s and 1970s was heavily involved in social issues such as drug reform in Australia. Following his marriage, Donald spent 10 years as an external student at the University of New England in Sydney, eventually graduating with a Bachelor of Arts in 1969, following which he began to study law and took some Italian classes. He was an enthusiastic individual and also took flying lessons, a novelty for a time when few people other than professional pilots learned to fly. He was also a decent athlete in these years, standing 6 foot 3 inches tall, and was a skilled squash player and a keen jogger. In the course of the 1960s, Donald was also becoming more involved in community issues in Griffith. He served as secretary of the Griffith Pioneer Lodge Committee and founded a local branch for the care and support of children with special needs in the district, as well as being involved in several other community groups. He and Barbara were also raising a large family, having had 4 children, Paul, Ruth, Mary and James, in the late 1950s and 1960s. But his life was to take a fateful shift in the 1970s, when Donald decided to stray into politics. In the early 1970s, representations were made to Mackay to convince him to run as a candidate for the Liberal Party in Griffith for the New South Wales State Legislature. He consequently ran for office in 1973 and again in 1976. While in between these two campaigns, he contested the local seat of Murrumbidgee for the National House of Representatives as well. During these campaigns, Mackay increasingly became an anti-drug campaigner in the region, highlighting the growing drug use and drug trade in Griffith and the Murrumbidgee district in general. Concerned with the effect of marijuana on young users, as well as the corruption within the regional police forces and local politics brought about by the drug trade, Mackay became a police informant. He was joined in his efforts by his wife Barbara. In June 1974, she wrote an anonymous letter to the Area News, the leading local paper in Griffith and the surrounding region since the 1940s. Here she questioned the justice of a decision which had been made in the courts in May of that year, in which 2 local farmers had gotten off with small fines for growing large amounts of cannabis in the region. Then, in February 1975, she sent another letter into the paper, this one with her name on it, again complaining about the local drug trade and the influence of criminal assets in the politics of the district. Just as Barbara's letters were drawing attention to the Mackays and their anti-drug campaigning, Donald was becoming a police informant. In 1975, he passed secret information which he had learned about onto the drug squad in Sydney about a cannabis plantation in Coleambally near Griffith. Pursuant from this, on the 10th of November 1975, Sydney Drug Squad police raided the farm and found the largest single crop of cannabis ever discovered in Australia up until that point. Perhaps unbeknownst to him, Mackay and his wife were dealing with a highly dangerous criminal organisation. Those involved in the Coleambally operation were part of the Australian branch of the Ndrangheta, who in the mid-1970s were using Griffith as a base for overseeing a large criminal enterprise in New South Wales, which reached into Sydney itself. The Ndrangheta, then as now, was one of the most prominent Italian crime organisations. It dates back to the late 18th century when it began establishing itself as a criminal organisation in the Kingdom of Naples in southern Italy. In the 20th century, it became the predominant mafia organisation in Calabria, the western leg of southern Italy, jutting outwards towards the island of Sicily. By the 1970s, it had expanded globally to South and North America, and even Australia. It had also gained widespread global notoriety at this time, as a result of having kidnapped the grandson of the American oil tycoon John Paul Getty in 1973, extorting $2.2 million, around $13.5 million today, as a ransom fee. Though the Ndrangheta is less conspicuous in the public's imagination, it is actually a bigger and more powerful criminal organisation than the Sicilian mafia Cosa Nostra. Hence, the people whom Mackay was campaigning against from 1974 onwards were members of one of the most violent criminal organisations in the modern world, and Mackay had hit their wallet hard. It is estimated that the Coleambally raid had cost the Ndrangheta over $42 million in lost sales and legal fees for those who were arrested. The role of the Ndrangheta in Mackay's disappearance would only become clear in time. The Coleambally case did not reach a courtroom until March 1977. When it did, it became more widely known that the raid had first been incited based on the tip-off that Mackay had provided to the Sydney Drug Squad. Additionally, corrupt elements within the local police also informed their criminal accomplices that Mackay had been the informant on a separate raid in the spring of 1977, though Mackay actually had nothing to do with this later operation. However, when a verdict was finally reached in the court case, a relatively lenient sentence was handed out. Disgusted with this decision, Mackay launched a public campaign to tackle the drug issue and reform the policing and sentencing of those who broke the law. On the 23rd of March 1977, he wrote to the Area News and organised a petition to this effect through the newspaper. By early May, when it was presented to the state legislature, Mackay had amassed in excess of 2,000 signatures, but little did he know at the time that his actions and his campaigning were making him very dangerous enemies. At about 6:30 p.m. in the evening of Friday the 15th of July 1977, Donald Mackay left the Hotel Griffith, where he had been having drinks with friends. Tragically, he was never seen again. 7 hours later, after the alarm was raised over his disappearance, his vehicle was located in the hotel car park. 322 gun cartridges were found nearby, along with drag marks and a clump of human hair. As if the gun cartridges were not ominous enough, Mackay's keys were found underneath the vehicle, and bloodstains were identified smeared on the van. It was quite obvious from early on in the investigation that Mackay had been killed, but who had committed the crime, and where were his remains? An investigation followed, but it was either handled incompetently by the local police, or, as it seems more likely, the authorities, many of whom were tied to the local Ndrangheta, did not make much effort to actually solve the crime. As a result, the Premier of New South Wales, Neville Wron, intervened and ordered a special judicial commission to investigate the matter. Following this, it was determined by Judge Phillips Woodward in 1979 that Mackay had been murdered 2 years earlier by a criminal organisation based in Griffith. Woodward named 6 people as having plotted the murder, all of Calabrian descent and clearly having ties to the Ndrangheta. These were Francesco Sergi, Domenico Sergi, 2 men, both bearing the name Antonio Sergi, Francesco Barbaro and Robert Trimble. These were intimately connected with the Colliamboli drug operation and knew that they would be suspected of involvement in Mackay's murder. Consequently, each had created an elaborate series of alibis by checking into motels and registering their presence in other places in mid-July 1977. However, Justice Woodward was confident that they had plotted to first kill Mackay on the 12th of July and then switch the date to the 15th. The judge was also clear that their motive was that Mackay's ongoing anti-drug campaigning was threatening their business interests in the illegal narcotics trade in Griffith and the surrounding area in New South Wales. Yet, the killer was most likely an unknown hitman who had been hired by the 4 men or someone close to them. There also appears to have been substantial police involvement in Mackay's murder. On the very afternoon that the campaigner had disappeared, Detective Constable Brian Borthwick and Detective Sergeant Arthur O'Sullivan had met with Antonio Sergi Sr., Domenico Sergi and Frank Barbaro at a winery in the region. However, Judge Woodward suggested that these policemen were not actually complicit in the murder, but somehow had been roped in simply to provide alibis for the 2 Sergis and Barbaro. Nevertheless, the fact that 2 senior police officers were socializing with known members of the Ndrangheta reflected exceptionally poorly on the police in New South Wales. Despite all these conclusions though, Justice Woodward acknowledged that there was insufficient evidence to bring charges against these men at the time. Some closure was given to Mackay's disappearance in 1984, when the local coroner in Griffith ruled that Mackay had been killed by a gunshot. Then in 1986, when James Frederick Basley was charged in association with the murder, Basley protested his innocence and instead accused a Sydney police officer named Fred Cracky of having murdered Mackay. Despite this counter-theory, Basley was found guilty of conspiring to murder Mackay and sentenced to 9 years in prison, a sentence which became life in prison for his role in a separate double murder sometime later. Yet, it is possible that he was not the triggerman in the Mackay incident. Basley died in a Melbourne nursing home in 2018, in his early 90s, but on a few occasions he spoke about the Mackay case in subsequent years, and he maintained his innocence. A further report on the Mackay affair, produced in Sydney in 1987, concluded that the anti-drug campaigner had been murdered and that local police officers and politicians were also involved, in addition to the local members of the Ndrangheta. Ultimately, while the story of Donald Mackay's disappearance still leaves many questions unanswered over 40 years later, Few, if any, doubt that he was murdered by the Ndrangheta in 1977 as a result of his anti-drug campaigning. In 2008, following the 30-year anniversary of Mackay's disappearance, a white marble bust of the anti-drug campaigner was erected on Banner Avenue, the main street of Griffith. A year later, he featured in Underbelly, A Tale of Two Cities, a long-running series on Australian national television which charted Griffith's central position in the Australian drug trade between the mid-1970s and the late 1980s. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching this video on Donald Mackay. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave a like and a comment down below, and if you're new, want to subscribe. I hope you guys have notifications on so you can see all my videos as soon as they're uploaded, and if you have any suggestions, be sure to leave them in the comments. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next unfortunate end. Thanks.